So here we are on the grades page, and as we go into general settings, one of the things I would say here straight away is that if you are an IT administrator or a system administrator and not on the academic side of Moodle, then you absolutely need to be making decisions in the grading area with academic staff. That's hugely important, and bear in mind that some of these things could have major implications if you need to change them later. So it's actually quite important to get these things right as early as possible. So a whole range of settings here relating to who is graded on a site. Obviously a student is the person that's usually graded on a site. You probably leave that as that default setting. Lots of options in terms of how aggregation may be working, whether scales are shown, whether you can show submitted, hidden grades, whether grades can in fact be published outside of the system. Generally the defaults are pretty good. However, there will be situations in specific academic institutions, maybe at university level, but also other cases where you really need to think about these options very carefully. One of the ones that I definitely want to highlight here is this recover grades default. Now, this means that if a user is unenrolled from a course, let's say they do a 3-month course and then you want to enroll them later, you have the option of either recovering all the grades or not recovering grades and treating this re-enrollment as a completely new enrollment. If you were doing health and safety training, for example, and you needed someone to go through that every year, you probably don't want the grades restoring. You want each attempt as a new attempt. So in that case, we would not want the grades to be brought back. Here we have a simple switch, yes or no, but that's hugely important when it comes to that restoring or re-enrollment, and you really need to get it right. You don't want to be changing this too often. There are also options in terms of how grades are actually can be exported. Obviously there's some of these formats possibly more popular than others, and then lots of other settings about whether we show the minimum grade, whether we allow unlimited grading. And as I said, these things really are, it's so important to discuss these with the academic or teaching staff and not think that an administrator who is not connected to the academic side or the teaching side can make good decisions here. There is an option, of course, to link grades here with an external gradebook, and that can be obviously really useful for streamlining the whole grading system. So even in that general settings area, lots of things that you need to think carefully about. We have grade categories, so categories within the grading system. And even if you think about the different methods of aggregation within grading systems, you really need to try and make sure that you're picking the right one to begin with. And if you're not familiar with these, and it is coming down to you to make these decisions, then you absolutely need to go into Moodle docs and start reading about these and how they're going to affect the gradebook for users. Yeah, lots of settings in there that really are going to affect how that gradebook works for people. The scales area is something that we do need to mention, because although teachers can often add scales for themselves, it's much more streamlined, much more efficient if an administrator sets up scales and then makes those scales available site-wide, so that those scales can be set up correctly and then instantly used throughout other courses. So if you wanted to add a new scale, pretty straightforward. Give the scale a name. I'll call this my scale. Decide what the values are, and if you're not sure how to do this, then there's a little help option there which reminds you exactly how to do this. So the one thing to remember here is that you start with the lowest value. So you might have not submitted, followed by pass, and then merit. So you may have a system that you use internally that you need to replicate within the scale system here, and you can obviously give a clear description, scale set up for this particular purpose. Make sure that's a good description, of course, if you've got multiple scales, and then save that. Now, because this scale has been created at the site level by the admin, then it will be available to be used against assignments and quizzes and other types of scaled activities. And obviously I've made a spelling error there, we're not too worried about that. It's also possible to set up letters. Some organisations might use letters for grading assignments and so on. If these break points for the highest and lowest don't quite tie in with your system, then this is where you can actually just edit those grades so they do fit with the system that you have. And we also have some settings for the reports. So the grader report, which is what teachers or other graders will use generally. Lots of good settings in here to think about. Obviously showing only active enrolments or previous enrolments as well. Whether you allow quick grading and quick feedback, these are things which can make teachers' lives a lot easier to mark. There are some Ajax. There's some Ajax code in there which can make things a lot quicker, a lot easier to grade, to mark. Lots of options in here about whether you're showing or hiding specific icons, whether you're showing the ability to lock a section, whether the ranges for these scales and gradings are shown. So again, I really wouldn't expect an IT administrator to be able to make all these decisions. It's something that you need to sit down with academic teaching staff and work through how these are going to affect your site. Grade history. Moodle does keep a grade history, so if grades are changed for a particular assignment, particular student, then Moodle remembers those changes. That can become quite a lot of information. You know, if people are going through iterative assignments where they maybe have 10 attempts with feedback, so you would actually have a history of 10 grades for every person for each assignment. So this just allows you to control that grade history and how big it gets, really. The overview report, a couple of options there. You know, we can show the ranking of each student if that was relevant. Possibly not in some situations. It might be seen as inappropriate. And we can also control here whether we're hiding totals if they contain hidden items. So, but we can change that as well. So that's important if people are hiding items within their grading systems. And then finally, the settings for the user report. Again, so this is what the user will generally see. Generally, this will be the default for them. So whether we want to show their percentage or not, whether that's relevant, it might just be that we want to show the grade. Again, whether the ranges and the weightings are relevant to people. They may be, they may not. It totally depends on how your systems and processes work internally. Might be useful to show an average to people, but you know, in other cases, it just simply wouldn't be. So yeah, lots and lots of options in here regarding the way the gradebook and the grading reports work. And you really do have to do a little bit of reading as well of Moodle docs to get these things right, to make sure that your system is going to produce grading and grading reports in the way you want it to. And as I said, it's not something that you actually often want to change in the middle of a process, in the middle of a course, because it can affect users and students and learners in general detest nothing more than seeing their grades altering for some unknown reason, particularly if they go down, of course.